Hi there, welcome back to the Car UK channel and to another Dealer's Guide video. Now in today's Dealer's Guide video we're going to be looking at the Fiat 500, which is also the Ford Ka. Ran from 2008 up until around 2020 when it was eventually changed the shape. Now we're going to be looking at things you need to look out for when buying a Fiat 500, particularly older ones, something that I deal a lot with here at the Car Pitch, my own car site. Like I said, I deal in vehicles retailing under £5,000, so I get a lot of Fiat 500s and Kas in from 2008 up to 2015-16 that sort of fit in that price band. Really good first cars, second cars, very popular with girls and women. But like I said, there's a lot of things you need to know when buying them because there's a few things that can go wrong with them. So we're going to look in this video of the key things you need to look out for, whether that's test driving one, visually looking around one, and underneath as well. It's a bit of an in-depth video. I hope you enjoy it. So let's crack on and have a look around a 500. Right, here we go. So the Fiat 500. Let's do a walk around and show you what you need to be looking out for when purchasing a 500. Now everything I say on this video will also be relevant to the Ford Ka. The Ford Ka ran from pretty much the same year, 2008. They all ran the same engines. The Ford Ka is effectively a Fiat 500, so I might make reference to one of those during the video. It's all the same. There's literally a few differences between the Ka and the 500, which I'll point out as we go around. And when we go later on underneath on the ramp, I'm going to show you underneath the Ka because I actually had one to hand. But like I said, everything is pretty much the same. 99% of it is all the same stuff. So the 500 ran from 2008 and is still in production. Now it has changed a few times along the way, but pretty much everything mentioned in this video will comply from 2008 all the way up to sort of 2016-17 when you did start to see some major changes. Engine wise on these you've got three major engines we'll be looking at, which is the 1.2 petrol, which is the most common and was used up until literally a few years ago, and also they did a 900cc, I think it's 900cc twin air model, two-cylinder version, which I don't know much about, and to be honest with you it's pretty pointless anyway. And they also do a 1.3 diesel. I wouldn't bother with the 1.3 diesel either. Like I said, the ones I would be buying are the 1.2s, which probably make up about 80% of the market under the sort of £5,000 sort of area target market people be looking at buying as a first time car or a second car, etc. The 1.2 engine is very good. It's a little based Fiat Punto engine, been around since the 1980s. Good things about it is it's got 1200cc displacement, so it's got a little bit of torque to it, so it's not too bad, but it still comes under the old £35 road tax bracket as well, which is quite impressive really, for the fact how old that engine is, that it still manages to meet pretty much modern emission standards until very recently. And the cheap tax also helps sell these cars as well. It's a nice little bonus. You compare that to like a 1.2 Fiesta or a 1.2 Corsa, even if cars newer than this don't even get anywhere near that on the tax band. So that's a good little selling point for them. And like I said, they're very popular, retro look to them, and actually for drive wise, when you get one that's right, they do actually drive quite well. Like I said, they are really good news from a selling point. So that's all good. Good news on the selling point. They're really popular, people like them, they're cheap to insure, they're cheap to run, and genuinely the engines are quite reliable. However, don't let that fool you, because there's just a lot of stuff you have to do to these to get them prepped, particularly of a certain age. If you're buying one a few years old, probably not too much to worry about, but when they start getting 10 years old plus, these really do start to fall to pieces, and you do have to spend a lot of money prepping these. We very rarely get one of these on that doesn't need something major doing to it, so you always have to be careful when buying them that you're not going to open up a can of worms, and you can make sure you're not paying too much for the car in the first place, because it will eat you in the wallet. Let's go around the car. So the first thing you want to be looking at on Fiat 500s is obviously the model spec is a key one. Pops and lounges are the most common you're going to come across this sort of age. The pops are very basic, do have lecky windows but don't usually have alloys on. They don't usually have the glass sunroof. Lounges usually have aircon, glass sunroof and alloys on. The alloys, which this car hasn't got any alloys on because it's a pop model, you have to check them out because sometimes they go really horrible. The alloys are not great on them and they can go really manky very quickly, and we have to end up refurbing quite a lot of them. They just seem to be very prone to sort of oxidation. So always check that out, and obviously if you've got the glass sunroof as well on the upper models, make sure that isn't cracked or anything, because if that's cracked it's extremely expensive to replace. Moving on, first thing you want to be checking out on these is check for corrosion at the lower end of the sills, particularly at the front corner here where it meets the bottom of the arch. They can chip away down there. Sometimes you can get away with a little touching or blowing, but other times they can actually bubble up and you can actually start to get corrosion coming on the outside of the sill. I haven't seen too many rot boxes of these, but you do see corrosion down there, can be quite isolated. Get on your knees, just have a quick look underneath the corners here at the front, particularly where these jacking points are, make sure you've got no horrible corrosion setting in. Door handles on these are an absolute nightmare on the 500s, not so much on the KAs. They don't seem to be too bad, they seem to be built a bit better, but these door handles are appalling, always falling apart. I'd say every other one we get needs a door handle. You can buy them online, you can buy them from Fiat, don't bother, don't waste your time. They're about 10 times the price as they are online, and they don't last any longer. So just buy the cheap ones off eBay. They'll last a few years and they'll break again. The same will be the case for the dealer one, so you might as well just save your money. Handles can be a little bit tricky to fit, but once you've mastered one, they're pretty straightforward to do from there on. Quickly move around the back of the car. Other things you need to look out for are the light clusters, fronts and rears. These can crack up and get a bit crazy paved and get moisture in them, so always check your lights out. These ones are luckily okay, but also the front headlights can go a bit funny as well. They can all crack up as well, so make sure you check those out for your lights. Major one on the back of these, make sure you check this, is really important, is the tailgate. Make sure it opens. The micro switch is built into the actual chrome trim of the boot where the reg lights sit. The micro switch sits in the actual handle itself with the registration plate lights, and you have to buy that as a whole unit. Now these are really expensive to buy. We try and get them salvaged off breakers wherever we can, but if you go online and try and buy one of those on eBay, you'd pay probably 50-60 quid for a second-hand one that works. New, don't even go there, they're just too expensive. So you obviously make sure they are working, because you say probably for every 3 of those you buy, these Fiats, one of those handles isn't working, so make sure you check those out. Other than that, really, they aren't too bad on the bodywork, to be fair. You can, like I say, you get a little bit of isolated bubbling sometimes on wings and corners, but that's pretty much it. Obviously, make sure your panel gaps are all right, your front bumpers are okay, and your back bumpers, make sure you got nice lines on there, they're all matching up with the wings. But other than that, really, they aren't too bad. There's nothing else on the exterior that I'll be too concerned about. So anyway, let's get ourselves inside and have a look in. First things you want to be checking, obviously door handles, as we mentioned earlier, give them a good tug. Steering wheels are a problem on these, particularly on the base model. So the upper models will have leather bound steering wheels. Yes, they can wear, but obviously because they're leather based, they do take a bit more punishment. Whereas the versions like this one, the pop models, they both don't have leather, so they basically become more worn very quickly. You can just see a little bit of wear on the top of this one. This has been replaced already because the one originally on it was horrendous. It was all fallen to pieces. Like I said, the leather ones do take a bit more punishment. Most of them are cream or ivory. They did do black steering wheels and interiors as well. Obviously, you can't really see the black ones that much because they hide in a lot of the wear, which is good. But obviously, make sure you check those out. You can buy steering wheels online. Make sure you check them thoroughly. Good pictures. Make sure you're not buying another one that's just as bad as what you've got. But you can get hold of the steering wheels, or if you know a good trim man, you can have them leather bound. But like I said, it's quite expensive to do that, but they are common for those. Steering gaiters is another one. So these steering gaiters here for your gear stick, these can all rip and tear and come to pieces. Buy these online. You can pick these up for about £10-12 off eBay. A little bit fiddly to fix, but it doesn't take too long. Like I said, don't bother buying it from Fiat. What is the point? They're 10 times the price. You might as well just buy a cheap one off eBay. They fit, they work, they last just as long as the others. Right, moving on. First thing, check key fobs. These can fall to pieces. They're not particularly well made, but you can pick these up for literally a few pounds off eBay. As long as they're functioning and working, you can just change that shell over and just reshell them. We keep them in stock, as I said, because most of these Fiat ones are all fallen to pieces. So first thing you want to be doing is fire it up. A couple of things you need to be looking out for. Obviously, you don't want any warning lights on the dashboard. Now, appreciate on this now, the way unfortunately modern film and cameras work, all these lights will be flickering now as you're seeing it on the screen. That isn't basically what I'm seeing. They are standing still. It's just the way the cameras work and the pixelations. But you make sure you've got no warning lights on the dash. Rev it up, make sure you've got a nice sounding engine, no misfires. We'll come back to that in a minute because they do suffer with some misfire issues on certain models. But what you'll be looking for, which is a bit difficult to explain here, is you want to be looking for any warning lights that look particularly dull. Now I'll try and give you an example. I'll put you a picture of one up here. But what can happen is these clusters can have problems where they fail and crack, and you actually get sort of warning lights coming on, sort of very dim, usually stuff like an ABS light or an airbag light coming on that's really dim. Now it's quite a common thing on these. You can have them repaired. Most MOT testers are aware of this problem and understand that they can tell the difference between when actually a warning light is on and when it's just the cluster's broken and it's just illuminating the light behind it. So you make sure you check those out because they are really common on these 500s and the KAs for the binnacles basically breaking down and need fixing. Companies we use online, we use companies like ECU Testing, places like that. There's a couple of places on eBay. You can send the binnacles off and get them repaired for very little money, around £100. Other things you need to check out for internally as well. Make sure your heaters are working. I've seen a few of these not working where resistors can pack up on them. Windows can be a problem. This is an example of one. This window's been intermittent. Sometimes it can just be the switch, but most of the time it's the motor and the door being intermittent. This one needs stripping down and looking at. Obviously make sure your power steering's working. That is really crucial. On this, it's electric steering, so it's not got like a pump on it and a power steering fluid. It runs off an electric motor column, which is based under this steering wheel. Check your city mode, make sure that's working, and turn it off, and obviously make sure you're not getting any warning lights on there. And make sure when you go on your test drive, but you're putting it through its paces, go on a drive, make sure you haven't got any steering faults. Steering faults on these are, I'll not say the common. They're not as common as the old Puntos. They were horrendous for stuff like that. But I have had a few of these with steering issues. End up having to take the steering column off and having to send them away, have them repaired, which can be quite expensive. It can be a good couple of £100 to have that done. Now, with your engine running, make sure you give a quick rev up. Make sure you're not got no misfires or any lumpiness. These can suffer with a couple of things that go wrong with the engine-wise. Plugs and leads, because they are very old-fashioned type plugs and lead system on these. It's a very old-fashioned engine. That can do something simple like that could cause a misfire. But also as well, if you're changing plugs and leads on these and you've still got a misfire, they do suffer with ECU faults as well, which can cause a sporadic misfire as well. It's not that common. I've seen one do it, but it is known that it do have issues sometimes with the ECU. So always be wary of one that's got a misfire. It probably 90% of the time will just be something simple as want some new plugs and some leads in it or a coil packs. But you obviously be wary of the fact that you could be looking at an ECU repair, which should be a couple of £100 to put right. So make sure it's running lovely, make sure it's revving up, shouldn't have any hesitation, it should sit nice on the idle, shouldn't have any lumpiness. Other things to be checking for as well is get your foot on that clutch. If you're hearing any sort of creaking of the pedal or anything like that, or any thrust bearing noises that disappear when you put the clutch down, you've probably got a clutch fault. Unfortunately, these suffer really bad with clutch issues. They can suffer with the actual clutch master cylinder dry out and cause a horrible creaking noise that sounds like it's coming from the foot pedal, but it's actually coming from the top of the gearbox. It's an external cylinder, which we'll come back to in a minute. So there's quite a lot to check there, so make sure you do it. Other little things as well, little minor things. Buttons on these stereos are horrendous. These always fall apart. Someone's already looked at a go at trying to replace these already, and they've got the wrong colour on there, so we'll have to get some, I think this is ivory. These ones are, but them ones are cream, someone's put in, so they will function, but obviously it's the wrong colour. And that's pretty much it, to be honest with you. There's not much else really to worry about. The odd handle I've seen go wrong on the seats. So these here, these are readily available off eBay. You can get these in cream and black for the 500s. However, pre-warn you on the KAs, they're a nightmare to get hold of. So these you can pick up for about 10-15 quid off eBay, whereas the KA ones, which I've got one that needs exactly the same, got the same problem, where these handles are basically fallen to pieces, you can't get them aftermarket. You have to get them from Ford. They're about 60 or 70 quid a piece each, which is a right pain. And I've actually got one now over in the corner that needs a handle on the passenger side. Unfortunately, they are not the same handles. They look similar, but they are different. They will not fit. So make sure that is one of the differences on the KAs and the 500 is those seat handles. Right, let's pop the bonnet. Okay, there it is, the most common engine you'll probably come across in a 500, which is a 1.2 Fiat fire engine, as we call them. Been around since the dawn of time, 1980s. They started off in the Fiat Unos, maybe some before that as well, I've forgotten about, but around the 1980s. Been in the Mark 1 Punto, Mark 2 Punto, Mark 3 Punto, Fiat 500s. All small Fiats have had a version of this fire engine in different versions. They did 1.1s, 1.2s as well. The most common you're going to find in this car is the 1.2 fire engine, which is this one. It's actually a pretty decent, reliable, old school engine. Now, things you need to be checking out for. Dipstick on these is hidden at the back, so you have to be careful, make sure it's in as well, because sometimes people don't put these back in properly and you get oil everywhere. Things you need to be checking out for: alternators. So when you're starting these up, if you're getting any noises, particularly down the sort of left-hand side here, sort of belt squeaking noises or anything like that, 9 times out of 10 it could be an alternator fault, because the alternators do have a habit of seizing up on these Fiats. Other things you mentioned before was about the coil pack and lead setup on these. Misfires can happen. Now I can't get to them on this because you've got all the airbox in the way, but they are quite old school with the coil pack and lead setup.
Like I said, most of those can go wrong and you can get misfire and lumpiness. Very easy to replace, cheap to do. You can get coil packs, leads and plugs for these for very little money, 60-70 quid, and get you a whole set of them, so still quite cheap to replace. The ECU is built on top here. Like I said, these can sometimes have issues with sporadic misfires, so if you've got a car that's misfiring, dropped on a cylinder or two, and it's not obviously plug and leads related, then you might have an issue with this ECU. Also, some trouble starting as well can sometimes be down to ECU faults. They are quite common, like I said, but I've only ever come across one personally, but I know dealers who've seemed to have pulled the hair out with them. Other things, major things you'll be looking for is down the left hand side here. They can suffer with coolant leaks, particularly from pipe works and stat housings, so you make sure you're checking down this left hand side here, make sure you've got no water or coolant leaks or anything like that. Now, another thing you need to be aware of, which is a fending item down here, is the bane of our lives recently at the moment for 500s, is this, which is the concentric slave cylinder, or external slave cylinder for the clutch. So this pushes the actual clutch fork and goes through the gearbox and pushes the clutch together. These are external, which is good because it means it's easily accessible. You've got to take the gearbox off if they go wrong. However, unfortunately, they do seem to suffer with drying out, getting water and stuff in them, on them, and it can basically get inside the actual cylinder and basically start to make them squeak or noisy or feel ropey, and they're extremely expensive to replace, because what happens is you have to buy that slave cylinder, and then you have to buy all the pipe work that goes to it, like a bottle setup, and at the moment they seem to be really in short supply. It goes all the way around the car and comes part of the actual bottle itself. It's all like a one unit, so it's a bit expensive to do. I'll put you a picture of here to try and explain what I'm on about. They are a nightmare to get hold of at the moment. They can also leak as well on the joins, so they've got like a one bayonet fitting on them, so when you put them together you can't take them apart again. They can leak on the joins. You can buy repair kits for those if you've only got one leaking or a hydraulic system that's leaking, so you can do that. But 9 times out of 10 you end up having to change the actual slave cylinder, external slave cylinder, and all the pipe work and the bottle, and doing it all as one, which is an absolute pain. And like I said, we struggle to get hold of them at the moment. There seems to be a massive shortage of those cylinders.
So anyway, right, that is the sort of general checks you want to be doing on one of these when you're going round it. Obviously we're going to drive it later on, but first we'll get it up in the air, and you can actually have a proper look underneath, and I can go into more detail about some of the things underneath that we're looking for when I'm buying these Fiat 500s and Ford KAs. Right, we're now underneath a Ford KA, but it is a Fiat 500, as we've already explained numerous times already. Everything underneath I'm going to show you now applies to a Fiat 500. I've just got a KA in the air at the moment, which we've done a lot of work to, including all the major things you'll find on the Fiat 500s that go wrong. They're all the same parts, they're all the same part numbers, same car. So everything I apply here is the same to the Fiat 500 before I get sort of slated in the comments. This is a really good example to use. Like I said, we've done most of the common things that goes wrong on these vehicles, so you can actually see firsthand what I'm talking about. So anyway, now in the air, let's have a look. The things we're going to look at first are the key things you can look at even if this vehicle was on the ground. I appreciate this is up in the air, so it's going to be obviously easier for me to see, and if you were buying one of these, obviously you're going to be restricted by not having a lift or a hoist available for you, but there are things that you can check on these, real crucial things that are, well, let's face it, really expensive to put right in some cases, which you can check by simply just popping your head under. So I'll shine some light on here. This has had already a brand new rear axle. Now you can stick your head under. Where these usually go wrong on the 500s and the KAs is actually where the cups are. So as you can see here, the axle there is bolted on to the stub axles of each wheel, and obviously to the actual monocoque of the car there, suspension arm points there, or the rear suspension arm mounting points. Now they actually corrode here on the cups here, so what will happen is you'll see the spring either popping out or real bad corrosion along here, and then obviously the string can sometimes protrude through the actual axle. And actually I can show you an example of one actually over here in the parts bin. So here is an example of one that's been taken off this car, and as you can see there, you can see what I mean, where the actual spring cup hanger itself has obviously deteriorated, the metal is very thin, and the spring obviously will then protrude through it. It drops the spring down, obviously the axle's unsecure, and eventually it can actually snap off, which is not good. In fact, if I show you this side, it's even worse. You can see the hole there, and that spring cup. Like I said, that is a really horrible, rotten axle. Around these years, sort of 10, 11, 12 plates, you are going to see this happening. Some worse than others. Obviously, where it's going to be located in the country, if it's somewhere there's a lot of salt on the roads, it's going to be more worse than it is somewhere that's a bit more drier. So make sure you pop your head under and make sure your axles are nice and clean. Now, they are going to look rusty and tatty, some of them do, but if they're not holed, that's pretty much all you need to know. If they're not holed, they're not going to fail an MOT. Obviously, if they're starting to look really bad, you're going to have to weigh that up and obviously in the factor of buying one, that it might become an issue later on. We replace a lot of these. I'd say for every 3 or 4 KAs or 500s we get, we end up changing the axle on at least one of them. When we do that, we always change the rear shockers with them as well, because we can buy them online very cheap. So we always do that because it obviously makes the ride better on the back, and you always end up changing the brake pipes as well, because they basically just don't come off right. So you always change the small ends of the brake pipes offwards and where they go into the flexes. In fact, this one's also had a flexi on it as well, because it's basically snapped when we've come off. So that's the first one, major one. Make sure you check your axles. The axles are readily available. You can buy them online. We get them off a company off eBay. They're about £135 each, whether it's for the KA or the 500. The shockers can be picked up again for about 35 quid for a set. We just buy the gas shockers for them. They are cheap ones, don't get me wrong, but we've used them for many years now and we've not had any issues with them, and we've never really had any problems with them coming back or any faults with them either. So sometimes cheap can be cheerful. The axles are not of inferior quality. In fact, I'd even say these are actually better quality than the ones you get from Fiat, because these are actually uprated and have a thicker metal on them, so effectively these should be outlasting the car. Now, moving on underneath, the main things obviously you're going to be checking on these underneath, really, I'll just go towards the front. Key areas are suspension arms. Now, it's going to be difficult for you to try and assess them really on the ground. You can sometimes poke your head through the gap here on the floor and you can see where the suspension bushes are. So obviously, as you can see here is the suspension arm. This is a nice shiny new one. What usually happens is the actual suspension arm bush, which is here, actually protrudes out, or the centre of this pin here, where the bush is, will actually erode away. You basically get the arm having too much excessive play, and the arms basically move or twitch. You can sometimes feel it when you're driving, or when you sort of tap on the brakes at a low speed, you can feel the front end sort of shudder, and that is a crucial one on these. Now, we've changed both of these. Wishbone arms are not particularly a difficult job to do on most cars. Unfortunately, on these, they're not as simplistic as they are on most other cars. It's mainly because where they are mounted and the accessibility to them. And unfortunately, without sort of boring you, you have to remove the front bumper and these brackets out of the way in order to get the wishbone arms off. So basically, it turns a job that's probably around 45 minutes aside to do for most mechanics, or even an amateur mechanic on the drive. It probably turns into a few hours because you're going to have to remove the bumper in order to do it. It's the same for the Fiat 500s and the Ford KA. So if you're going to have to do one, bear that in mind. It is going to be a little bit more time consuming, or if you're going to get a garage to do it, particularly expensive on the labour side. Arms can be picked up readily available. We get them online in bulk. They're around sort of 40 to 50 pounds a set. Most motor factors will sell you for around 30 to 40 pounds per arm. But it is a very common issue with the suspension arm bushes on these models deteriorating and falling apart and failing MOTs. I've failed many of them. Other things you need to check as well, drop links can be quite noisy on these. Now, the set we get with the arms comes with these drop links in, which are very fancy ones here with a little clear boot on them. That's a nice touch. But the drop links, I say, they come in the set anyway, so we just change them. 9 times out of 10, usually one of them's got play in them, so obviously changing your drop links, that's really easy to do. Drop links can be bought separately for around 10 to 15 pounds a piece and about 20 minutes to fit aside. Other things you need to check out for as well, stick your head under the front of the car and have a look at these sumps. Now, these 1.2 petrols, fire engines, are Fiat-derived engines, and they do suffer with corrosion. These sumps are basically cast steel. They become very pitted and can now basically leak. They usually leak from the outside inwards and start to get pinholes in them. Readily available. Again, we can get them from Motor Factors online for around 20 or 30 pounds a sump. This is a new one that's been put on. My colleague has gone a bit mad with the old mastic, but it is nonetheless sealed, and it comes with a new sump plug and washer as well. Other things that can go wrong on them is the exhaust system. Now, this one is actually going to be having a new flexi pipe exhaust on it. For now, it's not blowing, so we're just going to leave it until we've actually sold it. But so what happens is these flexis deteriorate, and in fact, you can see this one here. The meshing's already started to go, and eventually it starts to pull the inner parts of the flexi away, and eventually, obviously, start to get a blow. These are cheap to replace. You can buy the whole pipe towards the back box for very little money. Most motor factors charge you around 40 to 50 pounds for the pipe. They are very common ongoing. We end up changing probably about 1 in 3 that come into the workshop. Other things you might not necessarily be able to diagnose, rear gearbox mounts, or what we call dog bone mounts on here, are quite common for going. The way you probably try and diagnose that, if obviously not being in the air, but you put the car in first gear and sort of lift the clutch up in a sharp manner without stalling the vehicle and see if the car shudders really bad. If it does, that's a sign that the rear gearbox mount bush itself is deteriorated and it's pulling away from its mount, and obviously that's what's causing the engine and box to shudder forward. Readily available, you can pick these up for around 20 to 30 pounds from most motor factors and about 10 minutes to change in the air. A little bit more complicated if it's on the ground, because you obviously got to put it on stands, but it's not a particularly difficult job to do. On the front of the engine, which you can't really see, is the manifold and manifold gasket. The
Gaskets on these are very common for blowing. They come in either one-piece or two-piece sections. It doesn't matter which one you buy, they will both fit onto the actual car itself, although you have to be really careful in order to remove the manifold, because most of the times the studs themselves can help snapping, or the bolts snap, and it can be an absolute nightmare to obviously get them extracted out. There are ways of doing it. Pair of Stilsons, you can sometimes, if you've got a piece protruding out, you can get them out, or sometimes as well you can use a nut technique where you put a nut over the hole and weld in inside the nut and you can get them extracted. Not probably something most people are going to be able to do, but that's what you have to do in a workshop when you come across problems like that. It is quite common. They are an old school engine, they just seem to get a lot of water on the fronts, and that can cause the bolts to snap on removal doing the manifold gaskets. We mentioned earlier on the Fiat about the corrosion, particularly on these front sills here, why we got it up in the air, or have a look underneath. You make sure you're checking the undercarriage as well. Have seen the odd one with a little bit of corrosion going down here where it's actually hold the car, but it's quite rare. Most of the time it just sits on the fascias of the sill. This one's it's an old 9 plate and it's got a couple of little chips there, but that's not too bad for this age of vehicle. If you've got one that's really bad or peeling away here or it's going really soft, obviously plating it or repairing it. In the past as well, we've repaired them. We put a new Schultz line in, so maybe like a sort of we use something like a bottom guard which you can paint over the top of a proper factory type Schultz. It puts a nice sort of original line in, if you like, just to cover it up and smarten up the sills, particularly when they're bad. Usually on white cars you have to do that because they stand out quite a lot. Now, exhaust systems, they can blow on these joints, particularly on these clamps here, so make sure you always check those ones out, feeling for blows. This one as well, the back boxes, they can suffer, particularly with the baffles inside breaking down, causing blows. They can split open on the side seams here as well. I've seen them go. These back boxes are not particularly expensive to replace. This one is it's all right. It'd probably go for a ticket. The baffles are just starting to collapse in it, but it's when it becomes really sort of raspy and noisy, and it might sound like it's actually blowing, but it's not. It's just basically the innards here that are quieting down, the silencer, if you like, are eroded down, or basically eroded down, so it's not doing its job anymore. So it might sound a little bit more sort of raspy and noisy. That's a sign really we want to change in the back boxes. This one, to be honest, will probably end up being changed when we sell it. For the moment it's not blowing, but it'll do for now whilst we put it on the court. Also as well, going back to the end of the car again, the rear springs. These ones aren't too bad actually, but most of the time these Fiat springs, which they're derived on, usually do suffer really with corrosion quite badly. These look like they've probably been changed in the past before, maybe a few years ago. Now they do all go a bit rusty and horrible. Just because it's all rusty doesn't necessarily mean it's going to fail an MOT. In fact, a spring really only fails an MOT if it's broken or it's so badly corroded that it's imminently about to fail. To be honest, it's really when you've broken the spring that they're going more likely to be failing an actual MOT test. Most of the time, they're just going to get an advisory. I've seen these Fiat 500s and KAs 4 or 5 years old with really rusty springs from new. They are just like that. They just go like that. They're just very cheap springs they use. I will not be too concerned about rusty springs so much. If it bothers you, they're very easy to replace and they're very cheap to replace. But if it's not broken, it's not going to fail an MOT and it's not going to make any difference to the drivability of the car. It's just more aesthetics of it. So don't get too hung up on rusty springs. These ones we've put back in, we just reuse the old ones. There's nothing wrong with them. They're perfectly acceptable springs and we'll pass an MOT with no issues at all. That's pretty much it underneath. The only other thing I can think of is front shockers. In particular, they can suffer with weeping or basically limited damping, so how you going spongy, how you would detect that basically. Visually looking at it if you're able to, so you can see if they're actually leaking, pushing down on the car when it's on the ground, right, it's on the floor and actually feeling a bit bouncy. That's a real sure sign of a shocker's basically depleted and not doing its job properly. Also as well, under the bonnet, I'll put you a picture of it here. The top mount cups themselves, locating cups, they can sometimes corrode and you need to replace those. This is not the same as the actual top mount bush. This is actually a locating cup that sits on the outside of the strut tops. They're not really protected in any form, they're just bare metal and they can erode away. Eventually if they're left not treated, it can actually cause the top of the strut to come away from the actual mounting point and come through the body. So you've got to be really careful, make sure you check those out. If they are corroded or really badly rotten, I would definitely be changing those. Little top tip for you on those strut top cups locators. We always grease them up. If they're rotten or rusty, change them, please, because they're a safety item. They're very important. You don't want the strut coming off. You don't want to be killing someone. But if they're in decent order or fairly new, we always grease them up. Just obviously keeps the water out of them and also helps with the corrosion process, delays that sort of process, if you like. Anyhow, it's about time we got out for a test drive. So we're going to rig up the camera, go out in a 500 and see what you need to be looking out for when driving one and having a bit more of a chat about the model, why I buy them, what you need to be looking out for when buying them, what you should be paying for them and what the sort of market is like around them buying and selling in the used car sector.
Okay, so we're out on the road in the little 500. Going on a test drive, what do you need to be looking out for on these? Well, first of all, drive down the road, get it up to speed, 20-30 mile an hour, pulling off. You're making sure you're not got any misfiring or anything like that. Like I said, it's going back to those sort of plugs and leads issues or them ECU faults. If it's pulling off fine, then great. But then the main thing you need to be looking for as well is then when you're selecting through those gears, is the crucial one is the gearboxes. Real weak thing on a real weak component on these Fiat 1.2s is that gearbox they're using these. It's the same in the Puntos as well, of a similar era. They just suffer with problems with regards to crunching in gears, which is particularly bad, but more so whining in the gears. Now, what I mean is, we'll drive down the road, and if you've got whining or real horrible sort of bearing noise you can feel when you're driving down the road, it'd be really loud, by the way, it's very noticeable, particularly in the lower gears, first and second in particular. That's a knackered gearbox. It needs new bearings in there. Now, that's not the end of the world. The one that really kills it, if it's got crunchiness in gears. Let me explain the difference. So when you're changing gears itself, particularly from sort of into second or third, if you've got any type of crunching whatsoever, that's a completely total gearbox. You can have them rebuilt, but they're expensive to have done. We can have a new gearbox rebuilt for these for around £400 if the synchros are knackered. That's a full rebuild. Most of them have just got whines in the box. Like I said, you drive down the road, you get a horrible whining noise. They're not so bad. You can have them repaired for around £200 to £250. Although you've got to get the gearbox out. So then time you've done that, you take the box out, send it away, you've got to get it back. It's a lot of time taken up. And 9 times out of 10, you're probably going to end up putting a clutch in it as well. So it can turn into a very expensive job. So when you buy one of these, the most crucial thing you want to be checking is that gearbox on a test drive. If there's any noises whatsoever, walk away, or accept the fact that you're going to have to buy it very cheap in order to spend quite a bit of money to repair it. A mechanic probably will charge you, if you're lucky around here in the northwest of England, I'm giving prices on, this will be completely different down south. You probably get someone to do you a gearbox in and out, labour wise, and put a clutch in for about £300 or £400 if you shop about. Maybe if you're lucky, you touch smart less than that, but reality, that's what most people are going to pay. And then you've got to throw into the fact of a gearbox rebuild. You can easily spend £600 or £700 getting a third party to put you a new gearbox and clutch in this, job done. That's the even best case scenario. If you're a bit handy on the spanners, that's not so much of an issue. You can do it yourself and save that money. And like I said, in some cases, if you have got that ability to do that, you can find loads of these with knackered gearboxes that need rebuild or clutches that need doing, and you can actually pick these up really cheap, and that can be a really good avenue in order to try and drive some profit out of these Fiats. Other things we're checking for is steering as well, as we mentioned earlier. Make sure you've got no issues with that steering system. If it starts going heavy, you've got a problem with it. It will always need sending away and fixing. It's not just going to be a case of, oh, it might just be the battery's a little bit low. It never is. It's always the steering fault. If it comes on the steering and light and you've got an issue with heavy steering, you're sending it away. That's the reality. You can technically buy second-hand units and switch them out, but you have to make sure you've got the exact same code numbers on them. They're very different from the earlier Fiats, which would be literally, you could just put any old thing on. The best way of doing it is just to send them off. You get a brand new one, refurbed, you know, and it's got a warranty on it, it'll outlive the car. That's the main thing you want to be doing, and that's what we do with any of ours we come across. Now, buying wise, these things have come down quite a lot. They used to hold the money really well, but they have now started to become pretty decent buys, particularly the auctions and particularly in the second-hand market. Now, most of these are going to need work. In fact, pretty much everyone I buy is going to need some sort of work on it. And if you're lucky, it usually just could be one or two minor things, which is why it's really important when you're buying these that you go through these really thoroughly. I would probably avoid trying to buy these from auctions unless you've got the capability and the means to sort of fix them yourself, or you've got a good team behind you or good people you can use to repair these, because they are really expensive to get back on the road, particularly ones that are sort of over 10 years of age. So maybe more looking at maybe trying to buy these privately if you can, where you have the ability, or even from a trade where you can go to a dealership maybe and buy one out of the trade, where you can have the ability to check it properly and go on a proper test drive, because believe me, most of these at this sort of age do need something major doing to them, whether it's a clutch or whether it's a gearbox replacement or the axle's rotten. But if the numbers add up, you can have decent money out of them, and when you've got them right, they will fly out the door. They do sell. These are really good sellers, as I mentioned before, and that's the only reason why that we do sell them, because actually engine wise they're really decent. They're not that bad. They're not the sort of thing you're going to send out like a 1 litre EcoBoost or a PureTech engine or some of the other Volkswagen engines where you can send them out and have to cross your fingers and hope they don't come back. These aren't like that. They're generally quite good. Usually if we get a warranty claim on one of these, it's usually something stupid like the door handles come off or something like that. Right, okay, so enough of the test drive. Let's sum up basically what we need to be looking out for when buying a 500 NKA. The most important thing, let's get them bullet points made. First thing is checking out for, make sure you've got no problems with binnacles, steering, make sure you start it up and the steering's working, run it from city mode as well on the dash, make sure you press the button, get it on and off, make sure that's all working as well and on the test drive. Get your head under that back axle, make sure you check that back axle out, any corrosion like that. Like I said, they always look rusty and it is very difficult to determine how far gone it is. If it looks bad, it probably is, but don't get fooled by surface corrosion. I've seen these on 2016, 17 plates, 4 or 5 years old from new, going back a few years ago, where the springs have started to look rusty and the cups have started to look rusty. So surface rust is nothing to worry about. Most cars of this age will do that, particularly sort of cheapy cars like this. But real sustained corrosion where metal's coming off and it looks like it's about to go through, that's what you've got to be looking out for. The other option to that is if you had one that's been replaced, an axle that's been replaced, even better. Make sure you get down the road in it, have a test drive on one of these. If you're buying one from a private seller or a dealer, etc., make sure you drive it down the road. Make sure it's driving fine under load. Get it through the gears. Make sure you've got no misfires, no lurchiness or anything like that. Gears should be lovely and smooth, first, second, third, all the way through. Should be absolutely perfect. There should be absolutely no crunching whatsoever in the gears. If there's a crunch, even if it's just now and then, you go into third, it's fine, you go again and it crunches, then it's fine again, don't buy it. Or you have to make sure you accommodate the fact that you're going to be putting a gearbox in it. Also as well for whining in the gears, that's more common. So every 10 Duff gearboxes you come across, 2 or 3 of them will need a complete rebuild, but other 6 or 7 of them will probably only just want just a few bearings putting in them. That's a lot cheaper. They can be done for literally a few £100, £200 to £300. There's loads of companies that advertise rebuilds on these boxes. We've used a couple of them in the past as well. Other than that, you're just checking for general things, like say, windows not working or door handles that have fallen off, stuff like that. Little nitpick things that aren't too much to worry about. You get the odd suspension clatter and clungs, springs and stuff like that, or shockers that can go funny on them and go weepy and crash and bang. Stuff like that is, that's not going to break the bank. It's those major things, steering, the axles, the gearboxes, the clutches, that you need to be checking on one of these. If you've got green ticks on those, the rest of the car is going to be pretty straightforward to prep or pretty straightforward to get into a decent state for you either to sell it or someone to enjoy it and use it. Price wise for these things, you can pick these Fiats up now. I've had these picked up at auctions for as little as £500 in the auctions. Privately, you can buy them between 500 and £1,000. They're probably going to need quite a lot of work doing to them. The best thing to do, I would always advise you, is if you have to spend a little bit more on one, trying to buy one, then just do it. If it's for a loved one, this is obviously not talking about the trade here. If you're buying it for a loved one, don't go looking for the cheapest one you can find. If you need to spend a bit more and get one that's spot on, doesn't need any work doing to it or needs very little work doing to it, that's what I'd be going down. Because like I said, most of the stuff on these things can be quite expensive to put right. So don't go penny pinching. Trade wise, obviously it's a different kettle of fish. We're trying to make money out of them. Look, a car like this can sting you. This car I'm in today cost me £900, but we had to spend nearly £1,000 prepping it because everything just went wrong on it. It was a bad purchase, and we went down that route of basically trying to throw money at it until the point where we spent so much that we had to carry on. And now we've got a car that's at £2,850, which we'll get for it with 70-odd thousand miles on. But you're probably on like 500-600 quid wages for the fact that we put an axle on this car. We've had to put trim bits on it, it's had to have paint on it, it's had to have all sorts done to it. In reality, it wasn't worth doing. And that's the thing with these Fiat 500s, they can eat your wallet if you buy a bad one, like this one was when we first got it. It's great now, but we've had to spend an arm and a leg at it. So unless you know your onions, don't be buying them from auction unless you've got that back up there or you're mechanically knowledgeable in order to fix them. Go and buy one privately if you can, or from trade, where you've got that ability to test it properly and you can make sure that all those key things are working, and everything else then is not too much to worry about. If you can make the numbers work and turn these around and get a nice margin out of it, that's the hardest part, because selling them is a doddle. Absolute doddle. A clean 500 will fly out the door, particularly ones under sort of £3,500 mark. That is the sweet spot. But like I said, be careful, and if you're starting out, this is not the car to try and cut your hands on if you're having a go at buying and selling. try something else first and then work your way up to it. You'll naturally come across one of these anyway. If you start dealing cars, you'll get one Part X to you, or eventually someone will offer you one. That's the time. Get a bit of experience on your belt first before you start cutting your teeth in a 500, because they say they are hard work. Anyway, I hope this buyer's guide was of some use to you, whether you're looking to buy and sell these, or if you are just looking to buy one for a loved one. Anyway guys, thank you for watching this video. If you could help me out by pressing that like and subscribe button, I would greatly appreciate it. Thanks again, and I'll see you all in the next one.